Elena Voss ran through the dark trees with her heart slamming against her ribs. Branches tore at her jacket. Somewhere behind her, she heard footsteps that were too fast to belong to any person. She had come to Blackthorn Woods to find answers about the missing hikers, and now she understood, in the worst possible way, why nobody who came here ever explained what happened. A shape moved between the trees ahead of her, blocking the only path back toward the road. She stopped running and stood very still, trying to remember every warning she had ignored. The shape stepped into a patch of moonlight. It was not an animal, though for one terrifying second she thought it might be. It was a man, tall and broad, with eyes that caught the light like an animal's would. His skin looked pale under the moon, and his stare fixed on her with an intensity that made her stomach drop. She backed away slowly, but two more figures appeared behind her, cutting off any chance of escape. She was surrounded. "Please," Elena said, holding up her hands. "I'm not looking for trouble. I got lost. I'll leave right now if you let me go." None of them answered her. The tall one in front simply lifted two fingers, and the others moved forward and took her by the arms. She struggled, but their grip was like iron, gentle enough not to hurt her, but firm enough that fighting was pointless. They walked her deeper into the woods, past trees that grew thicker and older, until the forest opened into a hidden valley she never could have guessed existed from any map. Stone buildings rose from the earth like they had grown there naturally, lit by torches and lanterns instead of electric light. Dozens of people, if they even were people, watched her being brought through the gates. Elena had spent 3 years studying folklore and unexplained disappearances for her research position at the university. She had read every old story about shifters and hidden packs living in remote forests, and she had always treated them as metaphors, as symbols invented by frightened villagers centuries ago. Standing in the middle of a hidden stone village that should not exist, she finally admitted to herself that she had been wrong about almost everything. They brought her to a large hall with a high ceiling and rows of carved wooden pillars. At the far end, on a raised platform, sat a man in a black coat. Even from a distance, Elena could feel the weight of his presence, like the air itself grew heavier the closer she came to him. He did not stand up as she approached. He simply watched her, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp enough to cut. "Bring her closer," he said. His voice was low and controlled, but there was an edge underneath it that made the guards move quickly. Elena was walked to the center of the hall and left standing alone, facing him. Up close, she could see he was younger than she expected, though something about the way he carried himself made him seem far older than his face suggested. His hair was dark, his jaw sharp, and his eyes held a color that shifted between gold and deep brown, depending on how the torchlight hit them. He studied her the way someone studies a puzzle they were not expecting to find. "Who are you?" he asked, "and why were you in my territory?" Elena lifted her chin, refusing to let her fear show on her face, even though her hands were shaking at her sides. "My name is Elena Voss. I'm a researcher. I was following reports of missing hikers near these woods. I didn't mean to trespass on anyone's land." A murmur rippled through the hall. Several of the guards exchanged looks that Elena could not interpret. The man on the platform leaned forward slightly, his gaze narrowing. "A researcher," he repeated, as if testing the word. "You came looking for the missing, and you found us instead." "I didn't find anything," Elena said quickly. "I got lost. I don't even know what this place is. If you let me go, I promise I won't tell anyone what I saw." "That is not a promise I can accept from a stranger," he said. "Not when the safety of everyone in this hall depends on secrecy." Elena's stomach turned cold. She thought of every story she had ever read where the person who saw too much did not get to leave. She forced herself to breathe evenly, refusing to let her voice crack. "Then what happens to me now?" The man rose from his seat for the first time. He was even taller standing than Elena had guessed, and when he stepped down from the platform, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. He crossed the distance between them slowly, his boots echoing against the stone floor, until he stood only a few feet away from her. His eyes moved over her face, like he was searching for something he could not name. "What is your name again?" he asked quietly, though Elena was sure he had heard her the first time. "Elena," she said. "Elena Voss." Something shifted in his expression, so subtle that she almost missed it. For one heartbeat, the cold authority in his eyes cracked, replaced by something closer to shock. He masked it quickly. straightening his shoulders and stepping back, but Elena had seen it, and she did not understand what had caused it. "I am Kael Draven," he said. "This is my territory, and these are my people. You are not free to leave until I decide what to do with you." "That's not fair," Elena said before she could stop herself. Several guards stiffened at her tone, clearly unused to anyone speaking to him that way, but Kael did not react with anger. Instead, something almost like the corner of a smile touched his mouth, before disappearing again. "Fair has very little to do with survival," he said. "You wandered into a place that most humans do not know exists, and now you expect fairness. I admire the confidence, even if it is misplaced." "I'm not trying to be difficult," Elena said, trying a different approach. "I'm trying to understand what's happening to me. One minute I was hiking, and the next I'm being dragged through a forest by people who move faster than anything I've ever seen. If I'm going to be in danger here, I'd at least like to know why." Kael studied her for a long moment, long enough that the hall around them seemed to fade into silence. "You are not in the kind of danger you think you are," he finally said. "No one here intends to hurt you. But you cannot leave, not yet. You will remain within the palace under guard until I have decided what your presence means for us. And if I try to run, you will not get far," he said simply, without malice, as if stating a plain fact of nature. "There is nowhere to run in these woods that my people cannot find." Elena swallowed hard, understanding that arguing further would not change anything. She looked around the hall, taking in the rows of watching faces, some curious, some wary, a few outright hostile. She was completely alone here, with no way to call for help and no idea how far this hidden world stretched beyond the tree line. "Fine," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "Then at least tell me what you people are. I think I deserve that much." A low ripple of surprise passed through the guards near her, as if no prisoner had ever spoken so plainly to their king. Kael's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with something closer to fascination. "We are wolves," he said simply. "Not in the way your folklore imagines perhaps, but close enough. This pack has lived in these woods for longer than your cities have existed. We protect our own, and we protect our secrets, because the world outside these trees has never been kind to what it does not understand." Elena absorbed this slowly, her scientific mind trying to process something that broke every rule she had ever studied. Yet even as disbelief screamed at her to reject what she was hearing, some quieter part of her recognized the truth in his voice. She had seen the way the guards moved. She had seen his eyes catch the light like no human eyes ever could. "And the missing hikers," she said carefully, were they killed by your people?" Something flickered across Kael's face, something that looked almost like old grief. "No," he said firmly. "Those who wander too close to our borders are turned away, sometimes frightened enough that they never speak of what they saw. We do not take innocent lives without cause. Whatever happened to those hikers, it was not by our hand." Elena believed him, though she could not say exactly why. Maybe it was the certainty in his voice, or maybe it was simply that she wanted to believe there was still some good hidden inside all of this danger. Either way, a strange calm began to settle over her fear, even as the reality of her situation remained just as uncertain. "So what happens now?" she asked again. Kael turned to one of the guards standing near the platform, a broad-shouldered man with sharp eyes who had been watching the entire exchange with quiet intensity. "Soren," Kael said, "take her to the East Wing. See that she has a room, food, and anything else she requires. She is a guest of this pack, until I decide otherwise." "A guest," Elena repeated, unable to hide the disbelief in her voice. "You just told me I can't leave. That sounds more like a prisoner." "Call it whatever helps you sleep at night," Kael said, though there was no real hostility in the words. "But you will not be harmed. You have my word." Before Elena could respond, Soren stepped forward and gestured for her to follow. She hesitated, glancing back at Kael one more time, trying to understand the strange mixture of coldness and restraint she saw in his expression. He was watching her leave the way someone watches something precious slip through their fingers, though Elena had no way of knowing that yet. She only knew that something about the way he looked at her made her chest tighten in a way she could not explain. Soren led her out of the hall and down a long stone corridor lined with torches that burned steadily despite the absence of any wind. The palace, if it could be called that, was larger than it had appeared from outside, with hallways branching in every direction and rooms she could only guess the purpose of. Elena tried to memorize the path, some instinct telling her that knowing her way around might matter later, even if she could not yet say why. "You should be careful how you speak to him," Soren said after a while, his voice low and even. "Few people challenge Kale the way you just did. Fewer still walk away from it as easily as you have." "I wasn't trying to challenge anyone," Elena said. "I was just trying to survive a very strange night." Soren gave her a sideways glance that held more curiosity than hostility. "That may be. But I have served him for many years, and I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you tonight." Elena did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing at all. They walked the rest of the way in silence, until Soren stopped in front of a heavy wooden door and pushed it open, revealing a modest but comfortable room with a bed, a small table, and a narrow window that looked out over the dark treetops. "Rest if you can," Soren said. "Someone will bring food shortly, and Elena," he added, pausing at the door, "whatever you saw in his eyes tonight, do not mention it to anyone else in this palace. Not yet." Before she could ask what he meant, Soren was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Elena stood alone in the unfamiliar room, her mind racing through everything that had happened in the last few hours. She had come to these woods looking for answers about missing hikers, and instead she had found an entire hidden world she never knew existed, ruled by a man whose eyes had looked at her like she was something impossible. She sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, staring at the window, at the dark shapes of trees swaying gently in a breeze she could not feel from inside. Somewhere beyond those trees was the world she knew, the university, her small apartment, her ordinary life. It felt like it belonged to someone else now, someone who had not yet stumbled into a hidden valley, ruled by a king whose stare had cracked something open inside her chest the moment their eyes met. Elena did not know what tomorrow would bring, or what Kale Draven had truly seen when he looked at her that way. But as she lay back against the unfamiliar pillow, staring up at the stone ceiling, she found herself thinking not of escape, but of the strange, quiet ache in his expression right before he turned away. Something told her that whatever this was, it was only the beginning. Elena woke to the sound of a tray being set down on the small table beside her bed. She sat up quickly, disoriented for a moment, before the memory of the previous night crashed back into her mind. The hidden village, the hall full of watching eyes, the man named Kale Draven, whose gaze had felt like it was trying to solve her. A young woman with warm brown skin and curious eyes was arranging bread, fruit, and a bowl of something warm on the table. She smiled when she noticed Elena was awake.
"Good morning. My name is Dara."
"I was told to bring you breakfast and anything else you might need." "Thank you," Elena said, still groggy. "Is it really morning? I don't think I slept at all." "You did, actually," Dara said, glancing toward the window where soft light was filtering through the trees. "Almost 8 hours. I checked on you twice." Elena rubbed her eyes and looked around the room again in the daylight. It looked less frightening now, the stone walls warmer under the sun, the furniture simple but well made. Still, the reality of her situation had not changed. She was still trapped somewhere she did not understand, among people who were not entirely human. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said carefully. "What exactly is this place? I mean, I know what Kale told me, but how does a whole village stay hidden like this?" Dara hesitated, glancing toward the door as if checking that no one else was listening. "This territory has protections older than anyone alive remembers. It keeps curious eyes away, keeps the wrong people from stumbling in. You are the first outsider to enter these grounds in longer than I can remember." "Lucky me," Elena muttered. Dara's expression softened with something like sympathy. "I know this is frightening, but truly, no harm will come to you here, not while you are under the Alpha King's protection." "Is that what I am? Protected?" "You are something," Dara said, a strange note entering her voice. "I have never seen him order a stranger brought to comfortable quarters, instead of the holding cells beneath the palace. Whatever you are to him, it matters." Before Elena could ask what she meant, a firm knock sounded at the door, and Soren stepped inside without waiting for a response. His sharp eyes moved over the room briefly, before settling on Elena. "The Alpha King wishes to speak with you again," he said. "Now, if you are able." Elena's stomach tightened, though she tried not to let it show. She stood, smoothed down her wrinkled clothes as best she could, and followed Soren out into the corridor. Dara gave her an encouraging nod before she left, though Elena was not entirely sure what there was to be encouraged about. They walked through hallways that looked different in daylight, sunlight streaming through high windows, and illuminating carvings on the stone walls that told stories Elena did not yet understand, images of wolves and mountains and figures locked in what looked like ancient battles. She wanted to stop and study them, but Soren kept a steady pace that left no room for pausing. Instead of the great hall from the night before, Soren led her to a smaller room, more like a private study, with shelves of old books lining the walls and a large window overlooking the valley below. Kale stood near the window with his back to the door, his hands clasped behind him, looking out over his territory like a man carrying the weight of every person in it. "Leave us," Kale said without turning around, and Soren obeyed immediately, closing the door behind him as he left. Elena stood awkwardly near the entrance, unsure whether to speak first or wait. After a long moment, Kale finally turned to face her. In the daylight, his eyes looked less otherworldly and more simply intense, though the sharpness of his gaze had not softened at all. "Did you sleep?" he asked, his tone almost casual, though there was something careful underneath it. "Better than I expected to," Elena admitted. "Considering everything." "Considering everything," he repeated, a faint, almost bitter smile crossing his face. "You have a talent for understatement." "I've had a strange night," Elena said. "I think I'm allowed a little understatement." To her surprise, something like genuine amusement flickered in his eyes before he schooled his expression back into careful neutrality. He gestured toward a chair near the window, and Elena sat, watching him warily as he remained standing, choosing to pace rather than sit across from her. "I have spoken with my counsel this morning," he said. "Some believe you should be sent away immediately, with your memory of this place erased, through means I would rather not use unless necessary. Others believe you are too dangerous to release at all, human or not." Elena's pulse quickened. "And what do you believe?" Kale stopped pacing and looked at her directly, his jaw tight. "I believe neither option is acceptable." "Then what is?" "I do not know yet," he admitted, and something about the honesty in his voice surprised her more than any threat could have. "You are the first outsider I have allowed inside these walls in a very long time. There are reasons for that caution, reasons that predate either of us." "Because of what your people are," Elena said. "Because humans hunted you once, or still do." Something dark passed behind his eyes. "Among other things." Elena studied him carefully, noting the way his shoulders carried tension even when he tried to appear composed, the way his hands, when not clasped tightly behind his back, seemed to flex, as though searching for something to hold on to. Whatever burden he carried as the leader of this hidden pack, it clearly ran deeper than simple politics. "You could just tell me the truth," Elena said quietly. "Whatever it is you're not saying, I think I've earned that much, given everything I've already seen." Kale's gaze sharpened, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away, though she forced herself to hold steady. For a moment, she thought he might actually answer her. Instead, he shook his head slowly. "Not yet," he said. "There are things even I do not fully understand about what is happening. Speaking them aloud before I do would only complicate matters further." Elena frowned, frustration building beneath her patience. "You realize how unfair this is, right? You know exactly what I am, exactly what's happening in this place, and I'm sitting here completely in the dark, literally kept as some kind of unofficial prisoner while you decide my fate behind closed doors." "I am aware," Kale said, and to her surprise, there was no defensiveness in his tone, only a tired kind of honesty. "Believe me, Elena, if there were an easier path, I would take it. But some things cannot be rushed, no matter how uncomfortable the waiting becomes." The way he said her name, slow and deliberate, sent an unexpected shiver through her chest. She tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the practical matter at hand. "So what happens while I wait? Am I confined to that room for however long this takes you to decide?" "No," Kale said. "You will be permitted to move through the palace grounds, under guard, of course. I would prefer you did not attempt anything foolish, such as wandering toward the outer borders alone." "Wouldn't dream of it," Elena said dryly, though privately she was already cataloging everything she had seen so far, some instinct telling her that information might matter later, whether for escape or simply for understanding. Kale studied her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. "You are handling this remarkably well," he said finally. "Most humans who learn the truth about us respond with far more terror." Would terror change anything? No, he admitted. But it is the more common response, regardless. "I'm a researcher," Elena said. "I've spent years chasing stories that everyone else dismissed as folklore. Some small part of me always suspected there was truth buried in those legends. I suppose I'm less surprised than most people would be." Something shifted in Kale's expression at that, a flicker of genuine curiosity, replacing the guarded caution he had worn since she entered the room. "You believed, even before you had proof." "I hoped," Elena corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Belief is certainty," Elena said. "Hope is wanting something to be true, even when you can't prove it yet. I hoped there was more to the world than what everyone else accepted as normal. I just never expected to end up living inside the proof." Kale was quiet for a long moment, watching her with an expression she could not quite place, something between fascination and quiet sorrow. Finally, he turned back toward the window, looking out over the valley again. "You will stay in the East Wing for now," he said, his voice returning to its earlier formality, though something in it had softened slightly. "Soren will show you where you may go, and where you may not. If you require anything, ask Dara, and she will see that it is provided." "That's it? No more explanations?" "Not today," Kale said, and there was something final in his tone that told her pushing further would not work. "Patience, Elena. I know it is a difficult thing to ask of someone in your position, but I promise you, answers will come." Elena rose from the chair, sensing the conversation had reached its end, though 100 more questions burned in her chest. She paused at the door, looking back at him one more time. "For what it's worth," she said, "I don't think you're as dangerous as everyone in that hall last night seemed to believe." Kale turned to look at her, something raw flickering across his face before he masked it again. "You should be more careful with your assumptions," he said quietly. "I have done things to protect this pack that would change how you see me." "Maybe," Elena said. "But so far, you've had every opportunity to hurt me, and instead, you gave me a warm bed and breakfast. That tells me something too." She left before he could respond, though she felt the weight of his gaze on her back, long after the door closed between them. Outside, Soren was waiting, and as they walked back through the sunlit corridors, Elena found herself replaying the conversation over and over, trying to understand the strange mixture of caution and longing she had seen in Kale's eyes. Whatever secret he was keeping from her, she was more determined than ever to uncover it, even if some quiet part of her was beginning to suspect that the answer might change everything she thought she understood about her own place in this hidden world. 3 days passed in the palace, and Elena found herself falling into an uneasy rhythm. Soren escorted her through the gardens each morning, always watchful, always a few steps behind, though his sharp edges had begun to soften into something closer to reluctant friendliness. Dara visited often, bringing food and quiet conversation, slowly filling in pieces of the world Elena had stumbled into, careful never to reveal more than she seemed to think was allowed. On the 4th morning, Elena woke earlier than usual, restless in a way she could not explain. The room felt too small, the walls pressing in despite their comfort, and she found herself pacing near the window long before Dara arrived with breakfast. When a knock finally came, she expected the usual gentle presence, but instead found Soren standing there, his expression more serious than she had seen it before. "The Alpha King requests your presence in the training yard," he said. "He wishes to observe you outside these walls today." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Observe me? Like some kind of experiment?" "I would not phrase it that way in front of him," Soren said, the corner of his mouth twitching. "But essentially, yes." She followed him through the palace and out into open air for the first time since her arrival, and the sight that greeted her stole the breath from her lungs. The training yard stretched wide beneath the morning sun, surrounded by tall stone walls, with dozens of pack members moving through drills, some sparring hand to hand, others running along the perimeter with a speed that no ordinary person could match. The energy in the air was different out here, charged with something Elena could not name, but could certainly feel. Kale stood near the center of the yard, watching a pair of young shifters spar with quiet intensity. When Elena approached, he turned, and something in his expression shifted, though he quickly masked it behind his usual composed authority. "You wanted to see me," Elena said, coming to stand a respectful distance away. I wanted you to see this, Kale corrected, gesturing toward the training grounds. You have spent days confined to stone walls, asking questions I have not yet answered. I thought perhaps showing you a piece of our life here might help you understand what you have found. Elena watched the sparring pair for a moment, impressed, despite herself, by the speed and precision of their movements. It's beautiful, in a strange way, she admitted. Terrifying, but beautiful. Most things worth understanding are both, Kale said. They walked together along the edge of the yard, Kale occasionally pausing to explain what she was seeing, the different ranks within the pack, the purpose of certain drills, the careful balance between discipline and freedom that held the entire community together. Elena listened closely, cataloging every detail with the same instinct that had driven her research career, though something else was building alongside her curiosity, a quiet awareness of how close Kale walked beside her, how his voice softened slightly when he thought she was not paying attention to the change. Can I ask you something? Elena said as they paused near a low stone wall overlooking the training yard. You have not stopped asking since the moment you arrived, Kale said, though there was no real complaint in his tone. Fair enough, Elena said, allowing herself a small smile. Why me? Out of everyone who might have wandered into these woods, why did you choose to keep me close instead of sending me away, or worse? You still haven't given me a real answer. Kale's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Elena thought he might deflect the question again, the way he had every other time she pressed him. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, watching the training yard without really seeing it. There are things about our kind that are difficult to explain to someone who has not lived among us, he said finally. Bonds that form beyond reason, beyond choice. I do not fully understand why I felt what I felt the moment you looked at me in that hall, but I would be lying if I said it meant nothing. Elena's heart began to pound, though she could not have said exactly why his words affected her so deeply. What did you feel? Before Kale could answer, a sharp whistle cut through the air, and one of the training instructors called out for the Alpha King's attention regarding a dispute between two sparring partners. Kale's expression closed instantly, the vulnerability she had glimpsed disappearing behind practiced authority. Later, he said, his voice returning to its formal cadence. I need to attend to this. He walked away before Elena could protest, leaving her standing alone near the low wall, frustration and curiosity tangled together in her chest. She watched him cross the yard, noting the way the pack members straightened at his approach, the respect and even fear evident in their postures. And yet none of that quite matched the man who had stood beside her moments ago, speaking of bonds and feelings he did not fully understand. Elena spent the rest of the morning wandering the edges of the training yard, watching the drills with growing fascination. She noticed the way certain pairs moved in perfect synchronization, almost as though they could sense each other's next move before it happened, while others fought with clumsy hesitation, still learning the rhythm of their own bodies. Dara found her there eventually, bringing a light meal and settling beside her on the low wall. You look thoughtful, Dara observed, handing her a small parcel of bread and cheese. I have a lot to think about, Elena admitted. Kale started to tell me something this morning, about bonds forming beyond reason. He didn't finish. Dara's expression shifted, something careful entering her eyes. That is not a conversation for me to finish either, but I will say this much. Among our kind, there exists a connection some call fate, though the word feels too small for what it actually means. When two people are meant for each other in that way, the recognition is instant and undeniable. It does not happen often. In fact, most shifters live their entire lives without ever experiencing it. Elena's breath caught. Are you saying Kale thinks that's what this is, between us? I am saying nothing, Dara said quickly, though her eyes told a different story. I have only observed how he watches you when he believes no one is paying attention. That is all I am permitted to say. Elena sat with that information for the rest of the afternoon, turning it over in her mind again and again. It seemed impossible, the kind of thing she would have dismissed as pure fantasy only a week ago, and yet everything else she had witnessed since arriving in this hidden world had already rewritten what she believed possible. If something like a fated bond truly existed, and if Kale believed she was connected to him in that way, it would explain so much. His hesitation, his caution, the strange intensity in his eyes every time he looked at her. That evening, As the sun began to set over the valley, Elena found herself back in the training yard, unable to stay confined to her room any longer. The space was quieter now, most of the pack having retreated inside for the evening meal, though a few figures still moved through the shadows, finishing their duties. She walked along the perimeter, breathing in the cool evening air, when she heard footsteps approaching from behind. She turned to find Cale standing a few feet away, his expression softer than she had seen it before, the weight of his responsibilities seemingly set aside for the moment. "I did not expect to find you out here alone," he said. "I couldn't stay inside any longer," Elena admitted. "Too many thoughts, not enough space to think them in." Cale moved to stand beside her, both of them looking out over the darkening training yard in silence for a long moment. "I owe you the rest of that answer," he said finally, "from this morning." Elena's pulse quickened, though she tried to keep her voice steady. "I'm listening." "Among my kind," Cale began, echoing almost exactly what Dara had told her earlier, though hearing it from him carried a different weight entirely. "There exists a bond that some are fortunate, or unfortunate, enough to experience. A recognition between two souls that defies explanation, that cannot be chosen or avoided once it begins. And you believe that's what happened between us," Elena said quietly, "the night I arrived." Cale turned to face her fully, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her chest ache. "I have led this pack for many years," he said. "I have met countless people, human and shifter alike. I have never once felt what I felt the moment you looked at me in that hall. It defies everything I understand about myself, and yet I cannot deny it either." Elena's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "What does that mean? For both of us?" "I do not know," Cale admitted, and the honesty in his voice was almost more overwhelming than the confession itself. "I have spent years avoiding exactly this kind of connection, for reasons I am not yet ready to explain. But standing here with you, I find myself questioning whether avoidance is even possible anymore." The space between them felt charged, electric, the way it had that first night, when their eyes met across the crowded hall. Elena took a small step closer, driven by an instinct she could not fully explain, some pull that felt stronger than reason or caution. Cale's breath caught audibly, his hands flexing at his sides as though resisting the urge to reach for her. "I'm scared," Elena admitted quietly. "Not of you. Of how much this all feels real, even though none of it makes sense." "I understand that fear better than you know," Cale said, his voice rough with restraint. "But I promise you, Elena, whatever this connection means, I will not let it bring you harm, even if that means keeping my own distance from you." "That's not what I want," Elena said before she could stop herself. Something in Cale's expression cracked at those words, raw longing breaking through his careful composure for just a moment, before he forced himself to step back, putting deliberate distance between them. "It is what must happen, for now," he said, his voice tight with restraint. "There are dangers you do not yet understand, tied to this bond, tied to my bloodline. Until I know more, until I can protect you properly, I cannot allow myself to give in to what I feel." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to close the distance he had just created, but something in his eyes told her this was not a battle she would win tonight. Instead, she nodded slowly, swallowing the disappointment that rose in her throat. "Then tell me when you're ready," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." Cale's expression softened at that, something almost like gratitude flickering across his face before he schooled it back into careful neutrality. "Rest well, Elena," he said quietly, before turning and walking back toward the palace, leaving her alone in the darkening training yard, with her heart racing and 1,000 new questions burning in her mind. She stood there for a long while after he disappeared inside, staring up at the stars beginning to emerge over the valley, feeling the strange, undeniable pull of a connection she still did not fully understand. Whatever danger lay ahead, whatever secrets Cale was still keeping from her, one thing had become absolutely clear in that quiet moment between them. This was no longer simply about escaping a hidden village or uncovering the truth about missing hikers. Somewhere along the way, without meaning to, Elena had begun to care deeply about the guarded, complicated king who held her fate, and perhaps his own heart, so carefully in his hands. The days that followed brought a strange new closeness between Elena and Cale, though neither of them spoke openly about what had happened in the training yard. Elena found herself drawn toward the palace library more often, partly out of genuine curiosity, and partly because it gave her something to focus on, besides the constant, quiet pull she felt whenever Cale was near. Dara often joined her there, and it was during one of these quiet afternoons that Elena finally learned the deeper truth behind the pack's history. "You have been asking about our bloodline," Dara said, setting down a heavy leather-bound book on the table between them. "I think it is time you understood why the Alpha King carries so much caution." Elena leaned forward, her curiosity sharpening. "I'm listening." Dara opened the book carefully, revealing pages filled with elegant handwriting and faded illustrations of wolves standing beneath a crescent moon. Generations ago, before Cale's grandfather ruled this pack, a terrible betrayal occurred. A rival pack, jealous of the strength and prosperity of the royal bloodline, arranged for the death of an Alpha King's mate, believing it would weaken the pack beyond recovery. "That's horrible," Elena said quietly. "It was," Dara agreed, "but what followed was worse. The grieving Alpha King, consumed by rage and sorrow, called upon dark forces to curse his own bloodline, so that no future Alpha King in his line could ever claim happiness the way he once had. He believed that if his descendants could never love the way he had loved, they would never suffer the way he suffered." Elena's chest tightened with the weight of the story. "So every Alpha King since then has been forced to choose between power and love," Dara finished. "The curse does not forbid affection entirely, but the moment an Alpha King fully claims a mate, accepting the bond completely, the curse activates, testing whether that love is strong enough to survive. Few have survived the trial. Most mates have died before the bond could ever be completed." Elena felt cold, despite the warmth of the library. "And Cale knows this. That's why he's been keeping his distance." "He watched his own mother die when he was young," Dara said softly. "His father, in a moment of desperate love, tried to claim her fully, despite knowing the risk. She did not survive the trial that followed. Cale was only a child, but he remembers everything. He swore, even then, that he would never allow himself to walk the same path, no matter what his heart wanted." Elena sat back in her chair, the pieces of Cale's careful distance finally clicking into place. His hesitation in the training yard, the restraint in his eyes even as longing burned openly beneath the surface, all of it made a painful kind of sense now. He was not avoiding her because he did not care. He was avoiding her because he cared too much to risk losing her the way his father had lost his mother. "There has to be a way to break the curse," Elena said, determination rising in her voice. "Some story like this always has a way out." Dara's expression turned sympathetic, though tinged with doubt. "If there is, no one in generations has found it. Many have tried. All have failed." Elena closed the book slowly, her mind racing through everything she had just learned. She thought of Cale's eyes in the training yard, the raw vulnerability hidden beneath his careful authority, and something inside her hardened with resolve. Whatever this curse was, whatever danger it promised, she refused to believe that love itself was something worth running from forever. That evening, Elena sought Cale out in his private study, finding him seated at his desk, surrounded by scattered papers detailing pack business he seemed to have little interest in reviewing. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face before he composed himself. "Elena," he said, "I did not expect to see you tonight." "Dara told me about the curse," Elena said, choosing directness over careful diplomacy. "About your parents, about why you've been keeping your distance from me." Cale's expression shuddered instantly, his shoulders tensing, as though bracing for an argument he had clearly hoped to avoid. "Then you understand why this cannot continue," he said quietly. "Whatever exists between us, I will not risk your life for it." "That's not your decision to make alone," Elena said, moving closer despite the warning in his eyes. "You keep talking about protecting me, but have you ever considered that maybe I don't need protecting from my own choices?" "This is not the same as ordinary danger," Cale said, his voice tightening with barely controlled emotion. "I watched my mother die, because my father could not resist the pull of the bond. I will not repeat his mistake." "And what if avoiding it is its own kind of mistake?" Elena pressed. "What if the curse isn't testing whether love is strong enough to survive fear, but whether it's strong enough to survive being denied?" Cale's jaw tightened, and for a long moment, he said nothing at all, simply staring at her, with an expression caught somewhere between anguish and longing. "You cannot know that," he finally said. "No one does. That is exactly the danger I am trying to protect you from." Elena took a slow breath, softening her tone even as her resolve remained unshaken. "I'm not asking you to rush into anything tonight, Kale. I just need you to stop shutting me out completely. Let me understand what we're facing together, instead of deciding everything alone behind closed doors." Something in her words seemed to reach him, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly, though the caution never fully left his eyes. "I am not accustomed to sharing this burden with anyone," he admitted quietly. "I have carried it alone for so long, I hardly remember another way." "Then let this be the beginning of a different way," Elena said gently. Kale studied her for a long moment, something soft and unguarded passing across his face before he nodded slowly. The smallest concession, but a concession nonetheless. "I will try," he said, "though I cannot promise how well I will manage it." Elena allowed herself a small smile, relief loosening the tight knot of worry in her chest. "That's all I'm asking for." They talked for a while longer, Kale slowly opening up about fragments of his childhood, careful memories of his mother's laughter, and his father's quiet grief in the years after her death. Elena listened closely, treasuring every piece he offered, understanding now just how much trust it took for him to share, even small parts of a wound he had carried for so long in silence. By the time she finally returned to her own room that night, the distance between them felt smaller than it had in days, though the shadow of the curse still loomed heavily over everything they were slowly building together. Elena lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling, turning over everything Dara had told her about the ancient betrayal and the desperate curse that followed it. Somewhere deep in her chest, a stubborn certainty began to take root, a belief that history did not have to repeat itself, simply because it always had before. She did not yet know how she would prove it, but she knew, with a clarity that surprised her, that she was not willing to walk away from Kale simply because loving him carried a risk. If anything, that risk only made the connection between them feel more important to protect, rather than less. A horn blared across the valley just before dawn, sharp and urgent, tearing Elena from sleep instantly. She sat up in bed, heart pounding, as shouts echoed through the corridors outside her room. Before she could fully process what was happening, the door burst open, and Dara rushed in, her face pale with fear. "You need to come with me now," Dara said, already pulling Elena from the bed. "We are under attack. A rival pack has breached the outer border." Elena's blood ran cold. "Attack? What do I do? Where's Kale?" "He is leading the defense at the front gates," Dara said, guiding her quickly down the corridor. "We need to get you somewhere safe, deep in the palace, away from the fighting." The halls that had felt so peaceful only hours before now echoed with chaos, pack members rushing in every direction, some carrying weapons, others shouting orders Elena could not fully understand. The sound of distant fighting reached her ears, growls and shouts, and something that sounded terrifyingly like the clash of bodies colliding at impossible speed. Dara led her toward a lower level of the palace, a series of reinforced rooms meant for exactly this kind of emergency. But as they turned a final corner, a group of unfamiliar shifters burst through a side entrance, their eyes wild, their intentions unmistakably hostile. Dara pushed Elena behind her instinctively, positioning herself between the danger and the person she had been ordered to protect. "Run," Dara said sharply. "Find the east stairwell. I will hold them off." "I'm not leaving you," Elena said, panic rising in her chest. "You have to," Dara insisted, already shifting into a defensive stance. "Go, now." Elena hesitated only a moment longer, before turning and running down the corridor, her heart hammering against her ribs, as the sounds of fighting erupted behind her. She had no real plan, only the desperate need to find somewhere safe, but the palace felt like a maze now, every hallway looking identical in her panic. She turned a corner, and nearly collided with two enemy shifters blocking her path forward, their eyes locking onto her with predatory focus the moment they saw her. Elena froze, every instinct screaming at her to run, but there was nowhere left to go. The larger of the two stepped forward, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Well," he said, "it seems the rumors were true. The Alpha King really has found himself a human pet." "Stay away from me," Elena said, backing against the wall, searching desperately for any escape route. Before either shifter could move closer, a powerful force slammed into them from the side, sending both crashing into the opposite wall with bone-jarring impact. Kale stood between Elena and her attackers, his entire posture radiating barely controlled fury, his eyes glowing with an intensity that made even the enemy shifters hesitate. "Touch her again," Kale growled, his voice low and dangerous, "and it will be the last thing you ever do." The two attackers exchanged a wary glance before scrambling to their feet and fleeing down the corridor, clearly recognizing they were outmatched. Kale did not pursue them. Instead, he turned immediately to Elena, his expression shifting from fury to raw concern in an instant. "Are you hurt?" he asked, closing the distance between them and gripping her shoulders gently, checking her over with visible urgency. "I'm fine," Elena said, though her voice was shaking. "Dara," she stayed behind to hold them off. "I don't know if she's okay." "I will send help," Kale said immediately, though his hands remained on her shoulders a moment longer, as though he could not quite bring himself to let go. "You need to stay with me now. It is not safe for you to be alone." Elena nodded, and Kale guided her quickly through the corridors, his body angled protectively between her and any potential threat as they moved. The sounds of battle continued to echo throughout the palace, though it seemed to be gradually shifting further away, retreating toward the outer walls where the main force of Kale's warriors had rallied. They emerged into a courtyard just as a group of Kale's fighters successfully drove back another wave of attackers, the enemy shifters retreating toward the tree line under a hail of coordinated defense. Kale's grip on Elena's arm tightened protectively as chaos continued to unfold around them, his attention split between watching the battle and ensuring she remained safe beside him. Then, from the shadows near the courtyard wall, a lone attacker lunged forward, faster than anyone could react, aiming directly for Elena. Kale moved without hesitation, throwing himself between her and the attack, taking the full force of the blow meant for her. He staggered back, a deep gash tearing across his side, blood soaking quickly through his shirt. "Kale!" Elena screamed, catching him as his knees buckled slightly. The attacker did not get a second chance. Soren appeared seemingly from nowhere, cutting the enemy shifter down before he could strike again, his expression fierce with protective fury. Around them, the remaining attackers began retreating fully now, recognizing the tide had turned decisively against them. "I need to get him inside," Elena said, panic edging into her voice as she felt the warm slickness of Kale's blood against her hands. "I have him," Soren said quickly, moving to support Kale's weight, though Kale's eyes remained fixed on Elena, even as pain clearly racked through his body. "You are safe," he murmured, his voice weaker than she had ever heard it. "That is all that matters." "Don't talk like that," Elena said fiercely, walking alongside Soren as they carried Kale back into the palace. "You're going to be fine. Do you hear me? You have to be fine." The next hour passed in a blur of urgent activity as Kale was brought to a private chamber and tended to by the pack's healer, an older woman named Petra, whose steady hands worked quickly to clean and stitch the deep wound along his side. Elena refused to leave, standing anxiously nearby despite Soren's gentle suggestion that she rest elsewhere while the healing took place. "He will recover," Petra finally said, wiping her hands clean as she stepped back from the bed where Kale now lay, pale and unconscious from both blood loss and the herbs used to ease his pain. "The wound was deep, but not fatal. He simply needs rest now." Relief flooded through Elena so intensely that her knees nearly gave out beneath her. She sank into the chair beside the bed, watching Kale's steady but shallow breathing, still processing everything that had happened in the chaotic hours since dawn. "He should not have thrown himself in front of that attack," Petra said quietly, studying Elena with an appraising look. "An Alpha King's life is precious to this entire pack, yet he risked everything without a second thought, to protect you." Elena swallowed hard, guilt and something far more tender tangling together in her chest. "I never asked him to do that. He would not have needed to be asked," Petra said gently. "Some choices are made by the heart, long before the mind has time to weigh the risk." She gathered her supplies and moved toward the door, pausing briefly to look back at Elena one more time. "Stay with him. I suspect he will wake more easily, knowing you are near." Elena remained by Kale's bedside long after Petra left, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, replaying the moment he had thrown himself between her and danger without a single second of hesitation. Whatever careful distance he had tried to maintain between them these past weeks, whatever caution the curse demanded of him, none of it had mattered in that critical instant. He had chosen her safety over his own without thought, and that truth settled deep into her heart, undeniable and unshakable. As the afternoon light shifted golden through the window, Cale's eyes finally began to flutter open, disoriented at first, before focusing slowly on Elena's face beside him. A faint, exhausted smile touched his lips. "You stayed," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "Of course I stayed," Elena said, reaching gently for his hand. "You saved my life today. I wasn't going anywhere." Cale's fingers curled weakly around hers, and for a long, quiet moment, neither of them said anything at all, the events of the day settling heavily between them, alongside a fragile new understanding that whatever the curse threatened, whatever danger still lingered on the horizon, the bond between them had already grown far too strong to be denied any longer. The days following the attack passed slowly, filled with the quiet rhythm of recovery. Elena rarely left Cale's side, sitting with him through fevered nights when his wound threatened infection despite Petra's careful treatments, and through calmer afternoons when he was lucid enough to talk, though exhaustion often pulled him back into sleep before long conversations could fully form. On the third night after the attack, Cale's fever spiked sharply, and Elena spent hours pressing cool cloths against his forehead, watching helplessly as he tossed restlessly beneath the blankets, murmuring words that made little sense in his delirium. Somewhere in the depths of that fevered night, his murmuring grew clearer, fragments of sentences slipping past whatever careful walls he normally kept guarded. "I cannot lose her," he muttered, his hand gripping Elena's wrist tightly, even in his unconscious state. "Not like my mother. I cannot watch it happen again." Elena's breath caught, though she remained still, listening carefully as more fragments spilled out between restless movements. "The bond is already forming," he continued, his voice raw with an anguish that pierced straight through her chest. "I feel it every time she is near. I cannot stop it, no matter how hard I try. And if I claim her fully, the curse will come for her, the way it came for my mother." Tears gathered in Elena's eyes as she listened, finally understanding the full depth of the fear Cale had been carrying silently this entire time. It was not simply caution or duty driving his hesitation. It was genuine terror, rooted in a childhood tragedy that had shaped every choice he had made since. By morning, Cale's fever finally broke, and Petra declared him well enough to rest without constant supervision. Elena remained anyway, unwilling to leave, until she saw him fully awake and lucid with her own eyes. When his eyes finally opened again, clearer than they had been in days, he seemed disoriented for a moment, before recognition settled across his face. "Elena," he said softly. "How long have I been like this?" "3 days, Elena said gently. "You had us all worried." Cale attempted to sit up slightly, wincing at the pull of his healing wound. "I remember very little of the past 2 nights. Fever dreams, mostly." Elena hesitated, uncertain whether to reveal what she had overheard, but something in her felt it was time for honesty between them, especially now. "You said some things, while you were feverish, about your mother, about the curse, about not wanting to lose me the same way." Cale's expression shifted instantly, vulnerability flashing across his face before he attempted, weakly, to compose himself. "I did not intend for you to hear that." "I know," Elena said softly, taking his hand gently, "but I'm glad I did." "Cale, you've been carrying this fear alone for so long. Let me help you carry it now." "It is not that simple," Cale said, though his voice lacked its usual firm conviction, weakened by both physical exhaustion and the emotional weight of finally being truly seen. "The bond between us grows stronger every day, whether either of us intends it to or not. I felt it most strongly when that attacker moved toward you in the courtyard. Something inside me reacted before conscious thought even had a chance to catch up. That is exactly the kind of connection the curse punishes." "Or," Elena said carefully, "it's exactly the kind of connection that could prove the curse wrong." Cale studied her for a long moment, exhaustion and longing mingling openly in his gaze, now that his usual defenses had been worn thin by days of fever and pain. "You truly believe that?" "I have to," Elena said honestly, "because the alternative is watching you spend the rest of your life pushing away the one thing that might actually make you happy. out of fear of a tragedy that happened before either of us was even born. That doesn't seem like living, Cale. That seems like a different kind of dying, just slower. Her words seemed to strike something deep within him, his expression cracking slightly, as unshed emotion glistened in his eyes. I do not know how to stop being afraid, he admitted quietly, the confession clearly costing him something significant to voice aloud. I have built my entire life around avoiding exactly this kind of vulnerability. You don't have to stop being afraid, Elena said gently. You just have to decide that the fear doesn't get to make every choice for you anymore. Cale's hand tightened around hers, and for the first time since she had arrived in this hidden world, Elena saw something in his eyes that looked almost like hope, fragile and uncertain, but present nonetheless. You are a remarkable person, Elena Voss, he said softly. I do not know what I did to deserve finding you, but I am beginning to think fighting against it any longer would be the greater mistake. Warmth spread through Elena's chest at his words, though she was careful not to push him further than he was ready for in this moment of raw honesty. Rest now, she said gently. We have time to figure the rest out. You're not going anywhere, and neither am I. Cale's eyes drifted closed again, exhaustion finally overtaking him, though this time his expression carried a peace Elena had not seen in him before. She remained beside him as he slept, her thoughts turning over everything he had confessed, both in his fevered delirium and in the quiet vulnerability that followed. The curse still loomed over them, an unresolved threat neither of them fully understood, but something had shifted between them in these past few days, a fragile trust beginning to take root where careful distance had once stood guard. Over the following week, as Cale's strength gradually returned, Elena noticed subtle changes in the way he carried himself around her. The careful walls he had maintained since her arrival seemed to soften, replaced by small, deliberate moments of closeness, a hand resting briefly against her back as they walked through the corridors, quiet conversations that lingered longer than necessary, glances that no longer darted away the instant she caught them. Neither of them spoke openly about what these changes meant, content for now to simply exist within the growing warmth between them, though Elena sensed a larger conversation was building, one that neither of them could avoid forever. One evening, as Cale finally regained enough strength to walk unaided through the palace gardens, he paused beside a small stone fountain, watching the water ripple gently in the moonlight. Elena joined him, sensing something weighing on his mind. I have been thinking, Cale said quietly, about what you said, about fear not being allowed to make every choice. And? Elena prompted gently. And I am terrified, Cale admitted, turning to face her fully, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. More terrified than I have been of anything in my entire life. But I am also tired, Elena, tired of running from something that already exists between us, regardless of whether I choose to acknowledge it. Elena's heart pounded as she watched him take a small step closer, the distance between them shrinking in a way that felt both terrifying and inevitable. What are you saying? She asked softly. I am saying, Cale said, his voice low and rough with restrained emotion, that I do not know how much longer I can pretend I do not want this, want you, more than I have ever wanted anything before. The moonlight caught the raw vulnerability in his expression, and Elena felt the weight of the moment settle around them both, heavy with everything they had already survived together, and everything that still lay uncertain ahead. Neither of them moved to close the remaining distance just yet, the gravity of what full acceptance might mean holding them both in careful suspension, but something had shifted permanently between them in that quiet garden, a threshold neither could fully retreat from now that it had been crossed. Cale did not come to find Elena the next morning, nor the morning after that. She told herself he needed time, that the vulnerability of that moment beside the fountain had likely frightened him back into old habits of caution, but by the third day of near silence, worry had begun to outweigh patience. She finally sought him out herself, finding him alone in his private study, staring at old family portraits lining the far wall, his expression distant and troubled. You've been avoiding me, Elena said, closing the door quietly behind her. Cale did not turn around immediately. I have been thinking, he said instead, his voice carefully controlled in a way that immediately put Elena on edge. About the garden, Elena said, about what you told me. About all of it, Cale said, finally turning to face her. His expression was carefully composed, but Elena had spent enough time studying him now to see the storm hidden just beneath the surface. I spoke with the elders yesterday. I asked them, directly, whether there was any possibility the curse might spare you, given how it has manifested between us so far. Elena's chest tightened. And what did they say? They confirmed what I already feared, Kale said quietly. The curse does not care how strong the bond is, or how deserving either of us might be. The moment I claim you fully as my mate, the trial begins, and every mate before you who has faced that trial has died within it. Every single one, Elena, without exception. Elena felt the floor shift beneath her, the weight of his words settling heavily in her chest. There has to be something we can do, some way around it. I have searched every record this pack possesses, Kale said, his voice tightening with barely restrained anguish. I have spoken with every elder, who might hold even a fragment of forgotten knowledge. There is nothing, Elena, no loophole, no exception, no path forward that does not end with the very real possibility of your death. So what are you saying? Elena asked, though some part of her already sensed the answer forming in the air between them. Kale crossed the room slowly, stopping only a few feet away from her, his eyes filled with a grief so deep it made her chest ache just to witness it. I am saying that I love you, he said, the words breaking something open in his controlled composure, raw honesty spilling out after weeks of careful restraint. I did not intend to. I fought against it with everything I had, but somewhere between that first night in the Great Hall and this very moment, I fell in love with you completely, and now I am faced with an impossible choice. Elena's breath caught, her own heart aching at the depth of feeling finally laid bare between them. Kale. Let me finish, he said softly, though firmly, his voice trembling with restrained emotion. I cannot ask you to stay and risk a trial that has claimed the life of every mate before you. I refuse to become my father, watching helplessly as the person I love most is taken from me, knowing I could have prevented it simply by letting them go. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling slightly as it came to rest gently against her cheek, his thumb brushing softly against her skin, in a gesture so tender it brought sudden tears to her eyes. Tell me to leave, he whispered, his voice breaking on the words. Please, Elena, tell me to walk away from this, from you, before it is too late to protect you from what I cannot control. Give me the strength to do what my father could not. The room fell utterly silent, the weight of his plea hanging heavy in the space between them. Elena searched his eyes, seeing beneath the desperate plea to the terrified man underneath, a man who had spent his entire life bracing for a loss he had witnessed too young, now standing on the very edge of repeating history, simply because loving fully felt too dangerous to risk. She thought of everything they had survived together already, the attack, the fever, the slow unraveling of walls neither of them had intended to let fall. She thought of the quiet strength she had seen in him, the way he had thrown himself between her and danger, without a single moment of hesitation, proving through action what words alone could never fully capture. And she thought of her own heart, which had somehow, impossibly, come to belong to this guarded, complicated king, who feared love, not because he lacked courage, but because he had already lost too much to it once before. Elena reached up slowly and placed her hand over his, holding it firmly against her cheek instead of pulling away. No, she said softly, but with unshakable certainty. Kale's eyes widened slightly, confusion and desperate hope warring across his features. Elena, please, you do not understand what you are choosing. I understand perfectly, Elena interrupted gently, though firmly. I understand that you're trying to protect me, the same way you've tried to protect this entire pack your whole life, by carrying every burden alone, and pushing away anything that might make you vulnerable. But Kale, I am not asking you to protect me from loving me. I am asking you to trust that whatever comes next, we face it together, not apart. The trial has killed every mate before you, Kale said, his voice breaking with the weight of that fear. Every single one. Then maybe every mate before me faced it alone, Elena said quietly, with an alpha king, who loved them, but still could not fully let go of his own fear long enough to fight beside them completely. Maybe that's part of what the curse is truly testing, Kale. Not whether love is strong enough to survive tragedy, but whether it's strong enough to survive being fully, completely given, without holding anything back out of fear. Kale stared at her, something shifting deep in his eyes as her words settled over him, a possibility he had clearly never considered taking root in the space between his terror and his love. "You cannot know that," he said, though the conviction had drained from his voice, replaced by something closer to desperate hope. "No," Elena admitted. "I can't know that for certain, but I know this. I would rather face whatever trial comes, standing beside you with everything we have, than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if fear hadn't won. I choose you, Kale, fully, whatever that means, whatever it costs. I'm not asking you to tell me to leave, because I'm not going to." Tears gathered openly in Kale's eyes now, the last of his careful composure crumbling entirely as he pulled her gently against him, his forehead resting against hers, his breath unsteady with overwhelming emotion. "I do not deserve someone as brave as you," he murmured. "You deserve to stop believing that," Elena whispered back, her own tears falling freely now. "You deserve love, just as much as anyone else, Kale. Even an Alpha King is allowed to be loved without losing everything for it." They stood together like that for a long moment, foreheads pressed together, hands intertwined, the weight of an impossible choice settling into something that finally felt less like fear and more like resolve. Whatever trial awaited them, whatever the ancient curse demanded, Elena had made her choice clear, and slowly, achingly, she felt Kale's resistance finally begin to yield beneath the certainty of her presence. "If we do this," Kale said quietly, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes, "if I claim you fully, there will be no undoing it. The bond will be complete, and the trial will come, whether we are ready for it or not. Then we prepare," Elena said firmly. "Together. We learn everything we can about this curse. We gather every resource this pack has, and we face it as a team, instead of separately. I refuse to believe that love this strong is meant only to end in tragedy. Kale. I refuse to believe that's the whole story." Kale studied her for a long, searching moment, something settling into resolve behind his eyes. The terrified boy who had watched his mother die, slowly giving way to the king, who was finally ready to choose courage over fear. "Then let us prepare," he said softly, his hand tightening around hers with quiet determination. "Together, as you say, whatever comes, we will face it together." Elena felt a fragile but powerful hope bloom in her chest at those words, the first genuine hope she had felt since learning the full weight of the curse hanging over them. Whatever trial awaited them in the days ahead, whatever ancient darkness demanded to be tested, she knew now, with unshakable certainty, that she would not face it alone, and neither would he. Together, they would find a way to break a curse that had claimed too many lives already, or they would face its judgment with nothing held back, no fear allowed to steal away what they had finally, fully chosen to build between them. News of Kale's decision spread through the palace quickly, though not without significant unrest. The following morning, Kale called an emergency gathering of the pack elders, along with his most trusted advisors, to formally announce his intention to complete the bond with Elena. Elena stood beside him in the great hall, her chin lifted despite the weight of dozens of watchful, uncertain eyes fixed upon her. An elderly woman with silver hair and sharp, calculating eyes stepped forward from among the council, her expression grave. "Alpha King," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "You understand the risk you propose to take, not only with your own heart, but with the stability of this entire pack. If the trial claims her life, as it has claimed every mate before her, the grief alone could unravel everything your ancestors have built. I understand the risk, Elder Mira," Kale said steadily, though Elena could feel the tension radiating from him. "I have weighed it carefully, more carefully than any decision I have made in my reign. But I will not continue living under the shadow of a fear that was never mine to inherit. This pack deserves an Alpha King who leads with courage, not one who governs from behind walls built entirely from avoidance." Murmurs rippled through the gathered council, some clearly supportive, others visibly troubled. A younger council member, a broad-shouldered man named Garrick, who Elena recognized from the training yard, stepped forward next, his tone respectful but firm. "With respect, my king, courage and recklessness are not always the same thing. The curse has claimed every mate who came before her, without exception. What makes you believe this time will be different?" Elena felt Kale's hand find hers, holding firm despite the pressure of the room. "Because," Kale said, his voice steady and clear, "every Alpha King before me faced that trial, carrying fear alongside his love, never fully able to release the doubt that his mate might not survive. I intend to face it differently. I intend to face it with complete trust, complete commitment, and complete faith that love given fully, without reservation, is stronger than a curse born from grief and vengeance generations ago. Elena squeezed his hand gently, silently grateful for the conviction in his voice, even as her own heart pounded with uncertainty about what lay ahead. The elder woman, Mira, studied them both for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before finally speaking again. "If this is truly your choice," she said slowly, "then know that the trial will not wait for convenient timing. Once the bond is claimed, the curse will begin its testing within days, perhaps even hours. There will be no further opportunity to prepare beyond what you have already gathered." "We understand," Elena said, speaking for the first time since entering the hall, her voice steadier than she felt inside. "And we accept that risk, together." The council remained divided in the days that followed, some members offering quiet support, others maintaining visible skepticism about the wisdom of Kale's choice. Elena spent long hours in the palace library, alongside Dara and an aging scholar named Colm, poring over every fragmented record that mentioned the ancient curse, searching desperately for any detail that might help them survive whatever trial awaited. "Here," Colm said one afternoon, sliding a worn scroll across the table toward Elena, his weathered face creased with cautious excitement. "This passage is older than most records in our archive, written shortly after the curse was first cast. It speaks of the trial not simply as a test of survival, but as a test of choice." Elena leaned forward eagerly, scanning the faded script. "A test of choice? What does that mean?" "The language is ambiguous," Colm admitted, "but it suggests the trial does not simply strike randomly at the mate's life. Rather, it creates a circumstance, a moment of extreme danger, in which the Alpha King himself must choose between his own power and his mate's safety. If he chooses power, even briefly, even out of fear, the mate is lost. If he chooses his mate fully, without hesitation, the curse may finally release its hold." Elena's heart raced as she absorbed this new information. So it's not that love isn't strong enough to survive the trial. It's that fear, even a flicker of it, might be exactly what dooms every mate who came before. "That is my interpretation," Colm said carefully, "though I caution you, this record is old and incomplete. I cannot promise this theory holds true." Elena carried this fragile new hope to Kale that evening, finding him standing once again beside the garden fountain, his expression tense with the weight of preparation weighing heavily upon him. She explained Colm's findings carefully, watching as understanding slowly dawned across his features. "If this is true," Kale said slowly, "then the trial is not truly testing whether I can protect you from harm. It is testing whether I can release my own fear completely enough to choose you without hesitation, even at the cost of my own power, my own position, everything I have built as Alpha King." "That's what I understood too," Elena said, "which means the previous Alpha Kings, who lost their mates, maybe it wasn't because love wasn't strong enough. Maybe it's because, in that critical moment, some part of them still hesitated, still clung to power or duty over fully choosing their mate without any reservation." Kale was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the weight of this possibility. "My father," he said finally, his voice heavy with old grief. "He told me once, before he passed, that in the final moment of my mother's trial, he hesitated, only for a heartbeat. He believed abandoning his duties to the pack entirely, even briefly, would bring ruin to everyone who depended on him. That single heartbeat of hesitation may have cost my mother her life." Elena reached for his hand gently. "Then we know what we're facing now. Whatever trial comes, whatever impossible choice it presents, you cannot hesitate, not even for a heartbeat." "And if hesitating means choosing wrong for the pack," Kale asked quietly, "abandoning duty entirely in favor of you?" "Then you choose me," Elena said firmly. "Completely without doubt, without looking back. That's what the curse is truly testing, Kale. Not whether you love enough to survive tragedy, but whether you love enough to release everything else you've built your identity around, in the exact moment it matters most." Kale studied her for a long moment, something resolute settling behind his eyes, the last vestiges of doubt slowly giving way to unwavering determination. "Then I will not hesitate," he said quietly, but with absolute conviction. "Whatever the trial demands, whatever it costs, I choose you first, Elena." Without reservation, without doubt, without a single heartbeat of hesitation. Elena felt tears gather in her eyes at the certainty in his voice, a certainty that had been so carefully guarded weeks ago, now standing fully exposed and unwavering before her. "Then we're ready," she said softly. "Whatever comes next, we face it exactly as we planned, together, with nothing held back." That night, beneath a sky full of stars scattered across the valley, Cale and Elena stood together in the quiet garden, hands intertwined, hearts fully open to whatever trial the ancient curse would soon demand of them. The path ahead remained uncertain, dangerous, and unlike anything either of them had ever faced before. But for the first time since Elena had stumbled into this hidden world, she felt no fear at all standing beside the man she loved. Only quiet, unshakable resolve, and the certainty that whatever came next, they would meet it exactly as they had promised each other, completely, and without hesitation. The bonding ceremony took place 3 nights later, beneath a full moon that bathed the entire valley in silver light. The pack gathered in the great hall, torches burning steadily along the stone walls, every face turned toward the raised platform, where Cale and Elena stood together, ready to complete a bond that had been forming since the very first moment their eyes met. Elder Mira presided over the ceremony, her voice carrying solemnly through the hushed hall as she recited words older than the pack itself, words that spoke of unity, of trust, and of the ancient bond between fated mates. Elena felt her heart pounding as Cale took her hands in his eyes steady and full of quiet determination, despite the immense uncertainty of what would follow. "Do you accept this bond fully?" Mira asked, her gaze moving between them both, knowing the trial that follows, and the risk it carries. "I do," Cale said, his voice unwavering, carrying clearly through the silent hall, fully, and without hesitation. "I do," Elena echoed, her own voice steady, despite the racing of her heart. Mira nodded slowly, then stepped back, gesturing for them to complete the final act of the ceremony. Cale leaned forward slowly, his forehead resting against Elena's, as their hands remained tightly intertwined between them. The moment their lips met, a sudden warmth surged through Elena's entire body, radiating outward from her chest, in waves that felt almost like liquid moonlight moving beneath her skin. The hall around them seemed to dim, the torches flickering wildly, as an ancient energy stirred within the very stones of the palace. Elena gasped as the sensation intensified, her vision blurring at the edges as the world around her seemed to shift and warp. She felt Cale's hand tighten around hers, anchoring her even as reality itself seemed to fracture and reform around them both. When her vision cleared again, she found herself no longer standing in the great hall, but in a vast, shadowy landscape that felt both ancient and unnervingly alive, the sky above swirling with colors that had no name. Cale stood beside her still, his expression tense but resolute as he took in their surroundings. "The trial has begun," he said quietly. Before Elena could respond, the shadowy landscape shifted, and a figure emerged from the swirling darkness ahead of them, tall and cloaked, its face hidden beneath a hood that seemed woven from the same shifting shadows surrounding them. When it spoke, its voice echoed strangely, layered with dozens of whispered tones speaking in unison. "An Alpha King stands before me once again," the figure intoned, "seeking to break a curse forged in grief and vengeance long ago. Tell me, King of the Nightfall Pack, what will you sacrifice to save the one you love?" "Anything," Cale said immediately, without a single moment of hesitation, exactly as he had promised. "My power, my position, my very life if it is required. I choose her, fully and without reservation." The shadowed figure seemed to consider this for a long moment, before the landscape around them shifted once more. Suddenly, Elena felt a crushing weight pressing against her chest, as though invisible hands were slowly squeezing the breath from her lungs. She gasped, stumbling, and Cale immediately moved to support her, his arms wrapping protectively around her trembling body. "What is happening to her?" Cale demanded, fury and fear mingling sharply in his voice. "The trial requires a choice," the figure said calmly, unmoved by Cale's anger. "Her life fades with each passing moment. You may save her, but only by relinquishing your claim as Alpha King entirely, surrendering all power and position permanently. Or you may retain your throne, and watch her fade before you, exactly as your father once did. Elena felt her strength draining rapidly, her vision darkening at the edges as the crushing weight against her chest intensified. Through the haze of pain, she saw Kale's face, torn between fury and desperate love, his hands trembling as he held her close. "There is no choice to make," Kale said fiercely, turning to address the shadowed figure directly. "I release my claim, as Alpha King, fully and permanently, if that is what saves her life. Power means nothing to me, without her beside me to share it." The moment the words left his mouth, Elena felt the crushing pressure against her chest begin to ease, her strength slowly returning, as warmth spread outward from where Kale's hands rested against her. The shadowed figure remained still for a long moment, studying them both with an intensity that felt almost like judgment being weighed and measured. "You chose without hesitation," the figure finally said, its many layered voices carrying a note of something that might have been surprise. "Every Alpha King before you paused, if only for a heartbeat, weighing the cost of losing power, alongside the cost of losing love. You alone have chosen completely, without reservation, exactly as the original curse demanded of the king who first invoked it in grief." Elena, her strength fully restored now, looked up at Kale in confusion. "What does that mean?" The landscape around them began to shift again, the swirling shadows slowly dissolving into soft, golden light. The hooded figure lowered its hood at last, revealing not a monster or demon, but the weathered, sorrowful face of an old man, his eyes holding centuries of grief, finally beginning to lift. "I am the king who first cast this curse," he said quietly, his voice no longer layered with strange echoes, but simple and achingly human. "I cursed my own bloodline in the depths of my grief, believing that preventing my descendants from loving fully would spare them the pain I endured. But I was wrong. I did not realize until this very moment that the curse was never meant to punish love itself. It was meant to test whether love could exist without fear controlling it completely, the very fear that cost me my own mate centuries ago, when I hesitated to fully commit myself to saving her, clinging instead to my duty as king." Kale stared at the old king's spectral form, understanding slowly dawning across his features. "You hesitated too." "I did," the old king admitted, sorrow deep in his ancient eyes. "And in my grief and anger afterward, I created a curse that ensured every descendant after me would face the exact same test I failed, hoping desperately that one day, one of my bloodline might succeed where I could not, and finally break the cycle of fear I unknowingly created." He looked between Kale and Elena with something like profound relief settling across his weathered features. "You have succeeded, young king. Your complete, unhesitating choice has finally broken the curse that has haunted this bloodline for generations." The golden light around them intensified, warm and gentle, and Elena felt the strange, otherworldly landscape beginning to dissolve entirely, replaced slowly by the familiar stone walls of the great hall. As her vision cleared fully, she found herself standing once again on the raised platform, Kale's arms still wrapped protectively around her, the entire pack watching with a mixture of awe and disbelief, as the torches around them blazed suddenly brighter, as though the very palace itself were celebrating the breaking of an ancient, sorrowful curse. Elder Mira stepped forward slowly, her expression stunned as she studied them both carefully. "The trial," she said softly. "It has ended already. I have never witnessed it conclude so swiftly, nor so gently." "It's over," Elena said, still catching her breath, disbelief and overwhelming relief flooding through her simultaneously. "Kale, we did it. The curse. It's broken." Kale pulled her fully into his arms, relief and joy breaking openly across his face, for the first time since Elena had met him. The careful walls he had maintained for his entire life finally, completely dissolved. "We did it together," he murmured against her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "Exactly as we promised each other." Around them, the great hall erupted into stunned murmurs, quickly transforming into genuine celebration as word spread rapidly through the gathered pack that the ancient curse, the shadow that had haunted their royal bloodline for generations, had finally been broken. Elena held tightly to Kale, tears of relief and overwhelming joy streaming freely down her face, hardly able to believe that the impossible trial they had feared so deeply had ended not in tragedy, but in the quiet, powerful triumph of love, chosen fully, without hesitation, exactly when it mattered most. Word of the broken curse spread far beyond the walls of the Great Hall in the days that followed, traveling through every corner of the hidden valley until the entire pack had heard some version of the story, growing more legendary with each retelling. Elena found herself the subject of curious stares wherever she walked, though the wariness that had once colored those glances had transformed almost entirely into something closer to respect and quiet wonder. A week after the ceremony, Kale called together the full pack once more, this time not for an emergency, but for a celebration long overdue. The Great Hall had been transformed, adorned with flowers gathered from the surrounding forest, and lanterns strung carefully along every pillar, casting warm golden light across the gathered crowd. Elena stood beside Kale, on the same platform where the trial had begun, though the atmosphere now could not have felt more different. Joy and relief, replacing the tension and fear that had once hung so heavily in the air. "My people," Kale began, his voice carrying clearly and confidently through the hushed hall. "For generations, our bloodline has carried the weight of a curse born from grief. A curse that convinced every Alpha King before me that love and duty could never coexist without tragedy following close behind. That fear has shaped this pack in ways both seen and unseen, cautioning us against the very connections that make us strongest." He turned to look at Elena, his eyes warm with a depth of feeling he no longer bothered to hide. Elena Voss walked into our territory as a stranger, uncertain of what she had found, surrounded by people and traditions entirely unfamiliar to her. And yet, rather than turning away from the danger and uncertainty surrounding our bond, she chose to stay. She chose me, fully, without hesitation, even knowing the price that choice might carry. In doing so, she did not simply save my life. She freed this entire bloodline from a curse that has haunted us for generations. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Many faces turned toward Elena, with genuine warmth now, the wariness of her earliest days in the palace having fully given way to acceptance and gratitude. Elena felt her cheeks warm under the attention, though she stood tall, no longer the frightened researcher who had stumbled into these woods weeks ago, but someone who had found not just love, but a genuine place among these people. "Today," Kale continued, turning back to address the full hall, "I do not simply wish to celebrate the breaking of an ancient curse. I wish to formally present Elena Voss to this pack, not as a guest, not as an outsider, but as my mate, my equal, and from this day forward, your queen." The hall erupted into cheers, the sound echoing joyfully off the ancient stone walls, and Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes at the overwhelming warmth of the response. Dara, standing near the front of the crowd, beamed with obvious pride, while Soren offered a rare, genuine smile from his position near the platform. Even Elder Mira, who had questioned Kale's decision so seriously weeks earlier, inclined her head with clear respect toward Elena, acknowledging the courage it had taken to face the trial fully, and without fear. Kale took Elena's hand gently, turning to face her fully, as the cheers gradually settled into an expectant hush. "I promised you once," he said softly, his voice meant only for her, despite the attentive crowd surrounding them, "that whatever came, we would face it together. I intend to keep that promise for the rest of our lives, Elena. Not out of duty, and not out of fear, but because loving you has taught me more about courage than anything else I have experienced in my entire life." "I meant what I said too," Elena replied, her voice thick with emotion, but steady with certainty. "I chose you then, and I choose you now, completely, without any hesitation at all." Kale leaned down slowly, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead before pulling her into a warm embrace, as the hall erupted into renewed celebration around them, music beginning to play from somewhere near the back of the room, laughter and joyful conversation filling the space that had once held only fear and uncertainty. Elena held tightly to Kale, savoring the warmth of the moment, hardly able to believe how completely her life had transformed since that terrifying night she had first stumbled into these woods, lost and searching for answers about missing hikers. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around them, Kale led Elena quietly out into the garden, away from the noise and joyful chaos of the hall, toward the same fountain where he had first confessed his fear weeks earlier, and later, his love. The moon hung high above the valley, casting soft silver light across the water, and Elena felt a deep, settled peace as she stood beside Kale in the quiet evening air. Do you have any regrets? Kale asked softly, watching her carefully. About staying that night? About everything that followed? Elena considered the question seriously, though the answer came easily and without doubt. None, she said honestly. I came to these woods looking for answers about people who had disappeared, and instead I found an entire life I never knew I was missing. I found you, Kale. I found people who genuinely became my friends, a place that somehow began to feel like home, despite everything that made it strange and unfamiliar at first. I wouldn't change a single moment of it, even the frightening parts. Kale pulled her closer, resting his chin gently atop her head, as they both looked out over the moonlit valley together, the sounds of celebration still drifting faintly from the great hall behind them. I used to believe love was something dangerous, he admitted quietly. Something that could only end in loss and grief, exactly as it had for my parents. You taught me that love, chosen fully and without fear, can be the very thing that saves us instead. We taught each other, Elena said gently, tilting her head back to look up at him. I don't think either of us could have broken that curse alone. It took both of us, choosing each other completely, to finally end something that had haunted this pack for generations. Kale smiled softly, the expression far removed from the guarded, careful King Elena had first met in that torchlit hall weeks earlier. Then let us continue choosing each other, he said quietly, every single day, for as long as we both shall live. Every single day, Elena agreed softly, rising slightly on her toes to press a gentle kiss against his lips, sealing the promise between them beneath the quiet light of the moon. As the celebration continued behind them, and the ancient curse that had haunted the Nightfall Pack for generations finally lay broken and forgotten, Elena and Kale stood together in the peaceful garden, their future stretching ahead of them, uncertain in the way all futures are, but filled now with hope rather than fear. Whatever challenges awaited them, as king and queen of a hidden world Elena had never known existed until fate led her stumbling into these woods, she knew, with unshakable certainty, that she would face every single one of them exactly as she had faced the trial that first bound them together completely. Standing beside Kale, without hesitation and without regret, choosing him fully, again and again, for as long as their story continued to unfold.